I see that in resentful men all the time. They're very antipathetic towards women. I see that in resentful men all the time. They're very antipathetic towards women. And they blame their misery and resentment on the fact that women won't have anything to do with them. Well, the women are making them self-conscious for not being all they should be. Because the women think, why should I bother with you if you're not the embodiment of the spirit that will move into the unknown and face the Leviathan, which is exactly what she should be saying. And you're thinking, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that, but I'd like women to like me anyways. It's like, well, good luck with that. So that doesn't work out, right? And that's exactly what happens when God finds out that Adam and Eve have become self-conscious. One of the first things he says is, jig's up now, man. You're going to be working forever, toiling forever. It's your destiny. There's no escaping from it. Well, human beings work. What does that mean? They sacrifice the present for the future. And that's partly, as soon as this happens, like the next story, which is Cain and Abel, you see the motif of sacrifice emerge, right? That story circulates around the motif of sacrifice. Sacrifice the present for the future. Well, what's the price you pay? You don't get the present. That's a big price, right? Because what you do is, what you're doing essentially is you're taking all the potential suffering of the future and putting it into the present all the time. Well, so what happens? Well, maybe you live longer and you live healthier, but you're not without the burden that puts on you. There's very little difference between self-consciousness and shame. In fact, if you do psychometric analysis of the state of self-consciousness, it loads with neuroticism. So it loads with anxiety and emotional pain. So to become self-conscious, what does it mean to become self-conscious? It means you become aware. One way of thinking about it is you become aware of your vulnerability, or another is that you become aware of your insufficiency. Okay, so let's say that you're standing up in front of a crowd talking, and you become self-conscious. What happens? Well, first of all, you can't talk anymore. The second is you kind of fall inside. And the third is you feel ashamed. And the fourth is that you retreat and you look down. So it's a low status operation, and it's associated with heightened anxiety. And so then you might say, well, why would you become self-conscious before a crowd? Well, the answer is they can see you, right? And they can judge you. And you can make an error in front of them, and you can make a fool of yourself. So they put you down, that you can display yourself in a manner that ratchets you down the dominance hierarchy. That's to become self-conscious. And so, well, at least you have the advantage of being covered up in front of the crowd. But let's say all of a sudden you're stripped of your clothes. So what's the problem with that? Well, all of your insufficiencies, let's say, are on painful display. You can be evaluated by everyone. But even more importantly than that, if possible, is that clothes actually protect the most vulnerable parts of you. Human beings are upright animals, right? We're very strange animals. You take a cat or a dog, they're basically armored. The part of them that you see, their back is heavily armored, heavily protected. Human beings stretched upright. And so the softest parts of us are there for display. Who's more self-conscious, women or men? And the answer to that is, women are more self-conscious than men. And even further, you might say that women taught men to be self-conscious. And I believe that to be the case. Maybe babies taught women to be self-conscious, but women taught men to be self-conscious, and they still teach them that all the time. Because there's nothing that makes a man more self-conscious than to be rejected by a woman that he desires. So the woman is always offering self-consciousness to men, and it isn't necessarily a gift that they exactly appreciate. And that motif, of course, runs through the Adam and Eve story centrally, because Eve is damned forever in some sense for making Adam self-conscious. Well, he didn't want to be self-conscious. Things were pretty good when his eyes were closed and he was wandering around, not worrying about whether he was naked or not. Well, the women became self-conscious. Why? Because of snakes. Well, maybe, right? Maybe that's exactly what happened, you know? So imagine we're being preyed upon for millions of years by predatory reptiles, right? And we become more and more alert to threat and more alert to threat. And then one day we get so alert to threat that we can see threat lurking in the future. And then all of a sudden we become aware of the future, and then we become aware of death, and then we're really self-conscious. But it's pretty good if you want to keep the snakes down, which we've been doing quite successfully ever since then. But it's a big price to pay. We got so damn sensitive to threat that we were finally able to conceive the ultimate threat, not proximal threats, but the fact of threat itself, and the fact of mortality itself, and the fact of finitude itself. And maybe women learn that because they become painfully aware of the mortal limitations of their infants first, right? This small thing could die, could end, and certainly as an object of predation. And the problem again for men with being allied with women and infants is that it also heightens their self-consciousness, because you're a lot tougher and more indomitable, say, if there's just you. But as soon as you have a wife, say, and then you also have an infant, well, all the burden of their self-consciousness and their vulnerability is placed upon you. Well, it's a hell of a bargain. Well, why did men accept the bargain? Well, it's partly because women stood in front of them offering them fruit, right? Well, part of the price that the men paid for that was to wake the hell up. Well, who the hell wants that? It's a lot more calming to remain asleep with no knowledge of the sort of burden of mortality that you would bear if you became self-conscious. So fine, so now they're done with it. The snake and the fruit woke them up, and they can see, and the scales drop from their eyes, and so we can really see. Well, so what does that mean? Half our brain is devoted to visual processing. So as long as our eyes got better, our brain got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. What happens when it gets big enough? Well, not only can you see, you can meta-see. You can start to see into the future. Well, that's exactly what happened to us. Not only could we see with our eyes, we could see with our imagination. And our imagination is, you can see with your eyes closed, right? Close your eyes, bring up a vision. You can imagine the future. Well, what are you seeing? You're seeing a potential future with your eyes closed. The circuitry's there. Once it's developed, you can use it to imagine. You can project your vision into places that don't even exist, and you can start to conceptualize the future. What happens when you conceptualize the future? Well, I'm spoiling the punchline. You have to work, because you can see the future coming. You think, oh, the future's coming. It isn't just the present anymore. I don't have to just worry about whether or not I'm hungry right now. I'm going to have to worry about whether I'm hungry tomorrow and next week and next month and next year, and for me and for my wife and for my child and for the community. It's like you can forget about your day-to-day existence in paradise at that point. There's no evidence that people in industrialized societies are happier than people in non-industrialized societies. In fact, quite the contrary. We're less happy. Why? Well, because we fully and constantly bear the burden of the future. Well, that's good, because we don't die and we live maybe 30 years longer and we have fewer horrible diseases and all of that, but that doesn't mean it's any picnic. You have to carry that along with you wherever you go. That's the burden of self-consciousness.